We're living inside a profound economic mystery right now, and it's one you've likely felt in your own life, even if you couldn't quite put a name to it. Today, using official government data, we're going to dive deep into a defining American paradox. We're going to look at exactly why the American worker is producing more value than ever before in history, yet somehow accumulating less tangible wealth. Let's get into it. It's an anxiety felt at kitchen tables nationwide. You work hard, you put in the hours, your company thrives, but getting ahead just feels so much harder than it did for previous generations. So we're going to unpack the macroeconomic clues straight from the Federal Reserve, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Congressional Budget Office, and the GAO to finally solve this deeply personal paradox. The first major clue to solving our mystery lies right in the foundation of the modern economy. Analysts call it the Great Decoupling. Basically, this is a massive structural shift that started around 1980. It represents the growing, widening gap between the actual value created by human labor, which is our productivity, and the real financial compensation that those workers actually take home. See, for decades after World War II, roughly from 1947 to 1979, economic efficiency and wages rose hand in hand. It was simple. When a worker produced more, they earned more. It was the fundamental financial promise of the American workplace. But right around 1980, that promise broke. The two metrics completely separated. Thanks to technology and innovation, productivity skyrocketed. But real hourly compensation, when you adjust for inflation, essentially just flatlined. Just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of this split, let's look at early 2026. By the first quarter, the gap between the Bureau of Labor Statistics Labor Productivity Index and real hourly compensation hit an absolutely staggering 9.029 points. And that isn't just some abstract statistic. That number represents a massive volume of missing worker wealth. Those are massive gains in efficiency that were captured as corporate profit and capital returns instead of being passed down in wages. So your wages are systematically failing to keep up with economic output. But unfortunately, there's another force attacking those wages from the complete opposite side. Congressional Budget Office data shows that inflation has aggressively eaten away at the purchasing power of whatever money you do manage to take home. It creates this vice grip on the middle class. Your paycheck doesn't reflect your productivity, and the dollars inside that paycheck are buying you less and less every year. And this builds into a much deeper systemic issue. CBO data reveals that this inflation squeeze is particularly cruel depending on your income bracket. Get this, between 2020 and 2023, the daily necessities purchased by lower-income households actually increased in price faster than the goods bought by the highest earners. Lower-income bundles saw a 4.7% average annual increase, while the highest earners saw 4.4%. It literally costs more to have less. But the crisis truly escalates when we start looking at housing, which has historically been the primary engine of middle-class wealth in America. Let's rewind to 1985. The median household income was roughly $23,000, and a median home was about $82,000. Now, fast forward to 2025. Median incomes rose to about $83,000, which sounds great until you realize home prices exploded to nearly $427,000. Home prices have completely detached from what people actually earn. And that brings us to a really critical figure, 5.1. That is the nationwide price-to-income ratio by 2025. Back in 1985, a house cost about 3.5 times a family's annual income. Now, it's over 5 times. And if you look at major economic hubs like New York or Los Angeles, that ratio is pushing past 9 or even 12. The dream of homeownership in those areas is increasingly walled off from the average earner, basically reserved only for the top percentile. This intense financial pressure has fundamentally changed the very nature of American property ownership. As the source material notes, this dynamic is transforming a home from a savings vehicle into a debt vehicle. Millions of Americans are being trapped in a permanent renter class, while those who actually do manage to buy are burdened with incredibly heavy, lifelong mortgage obligations just to keep a roof over their heads. So think about this. What happens when your wages stagnate, but the cost of your groceries, your rents, and your dream home skyrocket? Well, you have to survive somehow, right? To survive this squeeze, millions of Americans have been forced to bridge this widening gap with credit. We are literally watching the transition of the American middle class into a deeply debt-dependent society. Commercial banks reported a staggering $1.09 trillion in outstanding credit card balances by the summer of 2026. $1.09 trillion.
And guys, this isn't just people taking lavish vacations or buying luxury items. This represents a citizenry running on a financial treadmill, using high-interest credit cards to pay for daily necessities just because their paycheck simply doesn't cover the cost of modern life anymore.
And here's the immediate, very real consequence of that treadmill. According to Federal Reserve data from early 2026, 11.16% of all disposable personal income is instantly swallowed up just to pay the interest on existing debt obligations. Think about that. Before a family can even think about saving a single penny for the future, more than 11 cents of every dollar they earn is redirected right back to banks and financial institutions just to service their debt.
Which brings us to the ultimate long-term consequence of this paradox. If your labor isn't paying off, housing is out of reach, and debt is eating your disposable income, what happens to wealth concentration and your retirement security as you age? This is where the Great Decoupling leaves its absolute most permanent mark. The Congressional Budget Office's $99 trillion wealth report gives us an incredibly sobering answer. By 2022, a staggering 60% of all wealth in the United States was hoarded by just the top 10% of families. Meanwhile, the bottom half of the country, 50% of the entire population, shares a mere 6% of the nation's wealth. The fruits of all that incredible American productivity have overwhelmingly flowed straight to the very top. And when it comes to retirement, JAO data confirms that this inequality compounds dramatically over time. High-income households are overwhelmingly more likely to even have a retirement account in the first place, and their median balances are miles ahead of the middle and lower classes. The reality is, a lifetime of hard work for lower-income Americans often results in virtually zero retirement security. Furthermore, the data highlights that these systemic economic pressures disproportionately impact minority groups. Tracking GAO data from 2007 to 2019 reveals persistent racial disparities that heavily dictate who is actually able to accumulate any retirement savings at all. White households had significantly greater median balances than households of all other races, often double the amount, which is driven largely by those persistent disparities in lifetime income and employment rates. Now, this divide isn't an accident. It is driven by systemic, job-related factors. High-income earners get larger employer match rates for their 401ks. Their benefits are heavily tied to long job tenure. And they enjoy tax codes that heavily favor those with higher marginal rates, meaning a wealthy person deducting contributions saves far more in taxes than a lower-income worker doing the exact same thing. The system mathematically accelerates wealth for people who already have it. So, as we step back and reflect on all this data, from the decoupling of wages and productivity, to the staggering cost of housing, to the intense concentration of wealth, we're left with a really vital question. How does a society adapt when the core promise of the American dream, the idea that diligent, honest labor leads to ownership and security, is mathematically slipping away? It's a question the data can outline, but ultimately it's one only we can answer.